Well, moving on now, and the government is obviously still considering its options after the High Court ruled against its asylum seeker swap deal with Malaysia.
The Prime Minister has criticised the court for what she described as effectively rewriting Australia's migration law. Michael Lavarch is a Professor of Law at the Queensland University of Technology and he's the former Attorney-General in the Keating government. He joins us now from Sydney. Michael Lavarch, good morning.
Morning, Michael.
What did you make of that broadside from the Prime Minister to the High Court?
Well, she wasn't real happy, was she? I mean, it's not unusual for members of the executive government to critique and be critical of High Court decisions. I mean, it's obviously occurred ever since we've had a High Court. I didn't think the Prime Minister crossed the line, but obviously her remarks showed a very deep frustration on behalf of the government on the court's decision and the fact that it's effectively taken it back to square one in terms of how it can develop an effective policy dealing with asylum seekers.
It's not a good look, though, for any Prime Minister to be attacking the independent umpire, is it?
Well, I don't think it's terribly wise for any Prime Minister or any minister really to go down this road. I mean, we've seen plenty of examples of it on the past. That's not to say that the court is somehow immune from critique or criticism. It isn't. Decisions like this are invariably controversial, and it obviously took the government seriously by surprise. The best legal advice the government had from its Solicitor General and its other legal officers in the Attorney General's Department clearly was that the legislation was well founded and it would survive High Court challenge. They've obviously got that rather wrong, and that's taken the government by surprise. It's obviously placed them in a politically difficult situation. That's self-evident, and against that backdrop, I suppose the Prime Minister's comments are sort of human and understandable. But probably now the best thing is to put that behind them and just sort of dust themselves off and to work out where they can go from here.
Well, that is the question this morning. Where do they go from here? As a lawyer and Attorney General, what's your take on the judgment? Does it also effectively rule out the government sending asylum seekers to Nauru?
Well, it probably doesn't completely kill that option, but you'd have to be very wary about trying to go down that road. What we've seen from the High Court really over the best part of almost 20 years to some extent, but certainly very clearly over the last 5 or 6 years, is a series of decisions which have expressed, in effect, a severe reservation about the way in which Australia has been dealing with asylum claims. So you've seen attempts by the government, both the Liberal government and the existing Labor government, to restrict administrative remedies in terms of appeal rights, to limit the capacity of claimants to go to the High Court itself, to separate out offshore and onshore processing regimes and give different rights regimes to each of those. And invariably, most of the court decisions have fallen against the government. On the whole, it would be fair to say that's quite a strong trend. So against that backdrop, say, well, we think we can construct something that fits just within the words of the High Court decision and start shunting people back to Nauru, I think would be both politically very difficult for the government, given its past stance about Nauru and the so-called Pacific solution, but now legally quite fraught. And I think you heard that from the Immigration Minister and the Prime Minister herself, that there would now be quite severe reservations in terms of the robust legal position in terms of trying to revive Nauru. I suspect really we have to face up to the fact that Australia does have obligations internationally, and that we might have to accept that those obligations have to be filled by processing asylum seekers in mainland Australia.
That's onshore processing, completely doing away with offshore processing, because as you know, not just legally, there'd be a revolt within the left of the Labor Party if the government now tried to dust off the Nauru option.
Well, that would be right, and it wouldn't simply be the left of the Labor Party. Look, this is an extraordinarily difficult issue. I don't think anyone sort of tries to deny that. We've got a great sea of public opinion which maybe is relatively uninformed in terms of the threat this poses to Australia or the number of claimants which are coming to our shores. There's also the blurring of the fact that there's far larger numbers of people who arrive lawfully into Australia through some form of visa, but then subsequently attempt to stay in the country, either through claiming asylum or some other avenue, than there is for people arriving in boat. Yet the facts of these situations seem to get swept away in the emotion of it. I think it's now time for the government to accept that while it may be an extraordinarily difficult political issue, it's not succeeding in attempting to process asylum seekers outside of Australia, that there needs to be an honest conversation with the Australian people. I know that's difficult, I don't pretend that it's easy, but that's probably what is now required, and a new fresh start in terms of processing asylum seekers on shore.
And further looking at the politics of all of this, Michael Lavarch, you were there in the dying days of the Keating government at the height of its unpopularity before poor Keating was trounced by John Howard in 1996. Looking at the current situation, do you get that same sense of doom about the Gillard government?
Look, no, I don't. I mean, I think people just need to take a little bit of a cold shower in terms of these dire predictions. This is a government that's not 1 year into its term yet. If I look back at the equivalent period during the first term of the Rudd government, I mean, the polls were effectively reversed. Labor had the same sort of lead that it is now behind. I've been around politics long enough to know that things do tend to move in cycles. The government does need a bit of clean air, I've got to say. It's had a pretty rugged run. A range of issues haven't gone the way that they would like, against a backdrop where it actually is, even despite it not being able to get this message out terribly effectively, a very effective government. It's been effective economically, it's been good in a whole range of social policies, its health reforms, its education reforms have all been very good pieces of public policy. But you wouldn't know that. They simply can't seem to get that message out against a whole series of debates which have dominated the airwaves, obviously asylum seekers being one of them. That said, if they can get a period of even 6 months of things being relatively stable, I think they've got some chance of reviving themselves. Now, I wouldn't be racing down to the bank and putting my life savings on them being re-elected at the moment, but by the same token, I wouldn't be writing them off at this point either.
OK, Michael Lavarch, thank you very much for your time this morning.
Thanks very much, Michael.